Hi, I'm Charles. Welcome to another solo episode of Onomatopoetix. As you can tell by my haircut, we are still under quarantine. This episode is double exposure hyperlapse. I really enjoyed making the last episode, and in response to it, I wanted to do something a little more active this time. Being restricted to the house does limit the options a bit, so I decided on two techniques that I really like. One that I could easily shoot here, and the other one which I could repurpose some footage that I already had. So the double exposure is, if you're not familiar with it, a term dating back to film cameras, where you would partially expose one frame, set up for a second shot, and expose that frame again, and when it was developed, you would have both images in one composition. Obviously today, when we're shooting with digital equipment and editing with digital systems, we can do this in a number of ways, and we will do this in post. As is often the case, I was inspired by other videos I saw online, in this case for double exposure and hyperlapse. There's some great videos out there that explain both these techniques very well, and I will leave links in the information below. The footage for the second image was the hyperlapse footage, which I had shot previously as a series of tests for another episode which I plan to do. And it worked out very well for this use, and you will see that in a minute. For the foreground image, I wanted the human form, and as I am limited by the number of subjects that are at my disposal, I had to get out of my comfort zone and use myself as the image. Originally, I wanted it to be dancing, but there's no way I'm going to dance in front of the camera, so I wanted to do something I was a little bit more comfortable doing, which is karate. The karate that you see is what's called kihon. It's a series of basic moves, strikes, punches, blocks, kicks, just repeated, and they serve as the foreground image on which we can project the footage. The footage itself was shot over a number of days, and it's two types of images. One is time-lapse photography, which I filmed at various locations, and the time-lapse in this case is of moving traffic on the highway. At that time, there were a lot of cars. I would go out at rush hour, and unlike today, they were, the flow was quite heavy, and you get a lot of nice streaking lights because I left the shutter intentionally open to create that effect. Just out shooting some nocturnal time lapses here on Route 78. So while I was shooting these time lapses, I was at various locations on ramps and overpasses and next to highways and parking lots, that sort of thing. And it was just a matter of time before someone approached me and asked me what I was doing. And in this case, it was a state trooper who hit me with his spotlight and on his megaphone asked me to come over to his car. With a very surprised look, asked me what I was doing. I explained I was doing time lapses of traffic. For some reason, he asked me where I parked, which I explained it was several blocks away. And then he just kind of paused for a second and said, "Well, you can't be here." So I, of course, packed up and left. I was done anyway. The second type of images are what's called a hyperlapse. And in the case of the hyperlapse, I took the same camera, the Canon 6D Mark II, and I secured it in my back seat with a tripod and seat belts, and I drove around for about 20 minutes with it, shooting one frame every second. And each frame was held open for a second, so it also created the streaking of lights from cars and from street lamps and whatever else was in the scene. For the foreground image, I wanted to have a white background. As I'm not shooting in a studio and don't have that kind of capability, I had to achieve it a different way. And the way I did it was to stand in my garage, essentially a darkened space, with the open door behind me, and adjust the camera so that it is correct for shooting me, thereby blowing out the entire background. You can get an idea of what the scene actually looks like in this photograph. So, once I have the foreground footage and I've collected the background footage that I want to use, it's time to combine them. This is all done, in this case, in Adobe Premiere. There were some effects added. First, I took the footage from, let's call it the karate footage, and I did a few minor adjustments to it, mainly changing the gamma. I liked it being sort of ghosted and white and the light wrapping around the edges of the body. And I wanted to play that up a little bit, but I wanted the image to be a bit darker, so changing the gamma was the easiest way to do that. And then I wanted it to be a little bit more stylized, so I added the time echo filter, which is the effect, I should say, which is the same one I used for the Katana time echo episode. Once you have that, then you can start layering on the background footage. And there's a number of ways you can do that depending on the way that you layer it. The simplest way is to do an overlay or something like that where you get to see the image in its true form. I did that. I couldn't leave well enough alone and had to push it a little farther and ended up doing hard mix, which achieves a very distinct look. It starts to look a little bit more painterly, maybe cartoonish. And I really like the effect, and then I kept adding on from there. You'll see, I started with the idea of shooting for double exposure, and I probably overshot a bit. And the results is what you'll see in just a second. Thank you so much for watching this episode. I really enjoyed making it. I hope you enjoyed watching it. I hope everyone's staying safe and practicing social distancing, and we'll get through this, and we'll see you again very soon. Thank you so much.